Shooter on the roof! Take him out! Shoot! Shoot! Shoot!
Dude, you shot off his head.
We've got to blow up that dock.
These are the sounds that you will likely hear coming from young gamers. Loud explosions, rapid gunfire, and cheers. At face value, this could cause concern.
I'm concerned that he'll be more violent when he plays, those fighting or violent video games.
I like that they're part of a team, but I'm worried about how it's going to affect their brain.
Fears that have followed this industry for decades, while generations of peaceful gamers find it impossible to connect this to this.
John 911, what's the location of your emergency?
Sandy Hook Elementary School, 1260.
It was in December of 2012 that the gaming industry took its biggest blow, when 20-year-old Adam Lanza shot and killed 20 students and 6 educators at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut. Media reports would directly link the latest research on violent video games to the cause of Adam Lanza's rampage.
Violent video games, the latest target of the president's task force on guns set up in the wake of the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre.
Adam Lanza was motivated by violent video games.
But the confusion may have come from the researchers themselves. Dr. Patrick Markey, a professor of psychology and brain sciences and co-author of the book Moral Combat, was one of those researchers. Appearing on the infamous White Hatter show, he explained what went wrong.
At the time, we tended to put our findings in the context of school shootings. We'd say things, and again, I was guilty of doing this, say things like, people thought, let's say, the Columbine shooting was caused by violent video games, so consistent with that belief, we found right after playing violent video games, you tend to feel more aggressive, suggesting that there's a link there. And what happened was really after Sandy Hook, the media picked up on a lot of the research we had done and used that to directly say, hey, this research, and research by other people like me too, I don't want to make it sound like we're the only ones by any means, said, hey, this research shows that the Sandy Hook shooting was probably caused because he played violent video games. And at the time, as a parent and as a researcher and just as a human, I was very disturbed by that, knowing what my research had shown. Like, my research didn't show anything at all related to school shootings. And again, I get why that mistake was made, because in our own studies, we, linked them to it. And that was wrong. We shouldn't have done that. Now, as a group of researchers, it was wrong that we were doing that, because we set up this narrative that's gone on for years that, hey, video games cause school shootings.
In our current world of collective illusion and misinformation, this unintended narrative helped fuel what academia referred to as moral panic. Our history is full of moral panic. The waltz, rock music, even Elvis Presley caused a moral panic. Cyndi Lauper's song She-Bop was among a list of songs that prompted a Senate hearing. Lawmakers believed it would cause teens to masturbate. Batman and Robin were thought to cause homosexuality.
What are you doing to our bodies?
Our history is full of moral panic, which in retrospect now seems rather silly. Today we have video games, and no matter how much research or how many studies conclude that violent video games do not cause violence, the fear lingers.
And the Olympic Esports Week 2023 begins!
2023 saw the first ever International Olympic Esports Games. Noticeably missing were the most popular first-person shooter games. We contacted the IOC to request an interview in hopes of getting insight and understanding into how they came to their decisions. They responded with a written statement, saying in part,
"When considering these proposals, it is important to us that the featured games in the Olympic Esports series align with the Olympic values. This includes avoiding any personal violence against the backdrop of the IOC's mission, which is to unite the world in peaceful competition
Their apprehension is understandable because although there are no studies that conclude violent video games cause violence,
the evidence is clear that playing first-person shooter violent video games over a long period of time increases the likelihood that a child will behave aggressively.
Dr. Jenny Radeski is a pediatrician and medical director at the Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health, and a chair for the American Academy of Pediatrics. When it comes to violent video games, Dr. Radeski promotes caution.
The overall research on kids and violent video games is that when there's violence, either because you are shooting other people or you're seeing something violent happen, like in Grand Theft Auto, you might see, someone being violent against a woman or hitting someone with a car. Violence has effects on kids in a few ways, even if it's fantasy violence in video games. Number one is it's arousing, which means kids get a little bit more excited. They may get a little bit scared. They may, have their blood pressure go up a little bit. It makes your nervous system a little bit more wired up. What we see sometimes is that some kids then can behave a little bit more out of control. They might be a little bit more aggressive when they play games that have more violence, and it might be harder for them to sleep. Now, every child is different, so I really want to say that some kids are more susceptible to this than others. There are some kids who may play a lot of violent games and it doesn't even faze them. So I think I encourage parents to try to understand, is my child someone who, when they see something violent or scary on TV, or they see something violent and they play it in a video game, do they have trouble sleeping? Are they a little bit more, wild or out of control later on? If you as a parent see that sort of correlation, that's really important information.
Today, our kids live in a world full of stress and aggression. It can be the most challenging task of a parent to figure out what we should protect them from and what we should teach them to overcome. But our fascination with violence might actually have very little to do with violent video games. For more than a decade, global statistics have put the United States at the top of the list when it comes to firearm-related homicides. Yet, Japan and Korea, where these games originate and are much more popular, have remained consistently at the bottom. The data also shows that if you live in a geographical area where video games are prevalent, you likely live in a safer community. And believe it or not, at times when violent media is being released, be it movies or video games, our crime rates actually drop.
What we look at is times that people are playing violent video games. This is just in the United States. And we look at it annually, daily, and so forth. And it doesn't really matter which way you look at it. Basically, when people are playing violent video games, we see dips in things like homicides and aggravated assaults. We see similar things when there's releases of violent video games. So like when Grand Theft Auto gets released, we tend to see a dip in violent crime right after it gets released, specifically homicides. Call of Duty, when that gets released, we see a dip in these violent crimes right afterward. We also see it with movies too. So when popular violent movies are out, we tend to see dips in violent crimes right after they get released and things of that sort. This has been a trend that has existed as long as we can really go back to with research that has looked at it. That when people are consuming violent media, violent crime dips. And the neat thing is it doesn't go back up. So it's not like it dips and then like a week later we see this sudden surge that makes up for it. It just dips, and that's kind of it. Basically, it's gone.
Our thirst for violent entertainment is made evident by the endless stream of online creators who showcase what Dr. Radeski referred to as wild or out-of-control gamers. But a closer look at the smiles on their faces may expose an alternative motive for their behavior.
I don't think Riot would ever change that, because people respond a lot to anger. And so if they're going to be angry, oftentimes, I mean, Facebook did this research, and I mean, that's what the whole documentary The Great Hack was on. It was on how can I create people to get angry enough to do something differently or solidify their position. And so in that sense, I think there is some motivation to kind of keep it kind of toxic, because then people come.
However, as this industry grows within our schools and our public domain, there is a demand for a more rigid code of conduct.
We're answering to and becoming beholden to stakeholders that absolutely need those questions answered sooner than later. And those are the people funding these sort of enterprises. And there's not really room for mistakes anymore. So with tech comes accountability. You're seeing games add phone numbers, two-factor authentication, and absolutely following up. If something violent or untoward happens in a game, in chat, in action, there's much easier systems than any before to report a player. Overwatch, Activision Blizzard, Fortnite, Rocket League, they're really good at it, and they will take action. They will ban the person, sometimes, depending on severity, but we have the ability to IP ban now and shut down a person's whole sort of. Until you move to Spectrum off Hawaiian Telecom, you're not getting on this game. And as we move these programs into arenas and public spaces, that's another value add, is that you have a mentor there that I'll say, what did you just say? Why did you say that? Why did you think that was okay? Those sorts of things. Accountability re-enters the room as we enter the room.
But even in the comfort of safety, can these emotional outbursts be a warning sign for a deeper psychological transformation?
One thing that I do think exists is that right after you're done playing a violent video game, you are kind of a little more hopped up. And that's okay, though. That's something that people get very worried about, and that's what most of our research has tapped into, that this is temporary. It's a temporary emotion, and it shouldn't be surprising, because video games, essentially, if I can get too broad here, are kind of like an artistic endeavor, that they evoke emotions in people. So when I watch, say, if I watch a movie, if I watch Forrest Gump, say, and I'm watching Forrest Gump, and I see Jenny die in Forrest Gump, I'm gonna cry, because I'm not made of stone. So I'm gonna cry when I see that. And if you ask me right when I see that scene, are you sad? I'm gonna say, heck yeah, I'm sad. I'm really sad right now. But that doesn't mean it's gonna change me. It's not gonna make me clinically depressed suddenly. Video games are the exact same way. Right after you play a game, I just lost that round, you're gonna be upset, but it's not gonna fundamentally change who you are. And so I think that's really important, that there's this kind of state versus trait mentality, that video games can evoke this temporary state in us like any kind of art form. It can make us sad, it can make us angry, it can make us wonder, it can make us think, but it doesn't necessarily transition into changing the core of who we are. And that's not what we're seeing in research. And that, again, is what most parents are worried about, is our video games changing their children to become kind of like psychopaths, basically. And there's no research at all to suggest that that happens.
I've been in video productions for my whole life, or in news and movies and that kind of thing. And yeah, I always said it was kind of fun to blow stuff up when people are not getting hurt or really they're not destroying anything. It was kind of cool.
So much of the internet and video games is this vicarious pleasure that you couldn't really do in real life, right? Like, you can't blow things up, create a fake virtual world. You can't fly. You can't do all this stuff, and that's why kids love video games. And I think there have been kind of moral panics about video games, like, oh, it's bad for kids. They're just doing all this shooting and violence and things like that. It's so much more complicated than that. And I think the ways to think it through are, one, video games are fun. They use our brain in lots of ways. If parents can sit down and play some video games with their kids, it lets you into your child's world a little bit to see what do they love about this. And it also lets you, as a parent, if you don't like some violence or some stereotype or something else you see in that video game, you get to comment about it. You get to teach the child about it while you're sitting there with them. It's so much easier to teach when you're joining together with the child rather than judging them from afar, right? So that's number one, is like take down the panic around it. Think more like, why does my child love this?
Like AYSO soccer age, like that's when parents could even get into this of like, hey, what are you playing? What's the goal of this game? Like, what are you trying to do? Wow, I see you're getting really mad. You're hitting the desk. It's time for us to take a break. You know, I think if parents were actually able to ask their kids or watch their kids or get interested in this activity that their kid is doing and not just be like, oh, there goes Timmy in his room again by himself playing his stupid game. But like, wow, how do you think it'd be awesome if we had parents asking their kids about their training, helping them structure to make sure that they have time to play their games and do their homework, and did they climb today, or you know, what was the best part about your games, or how all these things that typical parents do maybe at the baseball field, the soccer field, the swimming pool with their kids. Like, this is such an untapped activity that parents and kids can do together.
We used to go and play baseball. We played Little League, and it was a big deal in my youth to play there. And if I was up to bat, I'd want to look over and see my parents watching me, because they look. Now I'm sure my parents hated being at my Little League games. You know, in my mind, they were the greatest thing in the world, but I'm sure they hated it. But they were there to support me, and it meant a lot to me. And we find that children, when their parents show interest in their interest, it means a lot to them. And it's the same thing with Fortnite. As a parent, you might be like, oh my gosh, Fortnite, I can't stand Fortnite. But sit there, you don't even have to play with them. The point is, you just sit there and watch them play. And most children will appreciate, now they get to an age where they don't watch you anymore.
I know the feeling.
But when they're young, and I jest, but I do want to point out that even teenagers, it's still important to kind of fight through it. Let them have their independence, of course, but like, show interest, talk about it. My son talks to me about Fortnite all the time. I don't know what the hell he's saying. I just kind of nod my head most of the time, but I'm trying to show my support with it and so forth. And I'll read news on it so I can talk to him about things. That it's just another way to connect to children. This is really like a virtual playground where kids are playing at, and it's important for parents to be there to support their kids playing.
Another concept that most psychologists and researchers agree with is that video gaming has embedded itself so deeply into the social fabric of our youth that taking these games away from your child could be detrimental.
As a punishment, taking away technology can really backfire. And so one thing I advise families, if their kids love gaming, is that the child has like a regular, like a regular schedule of when they get to play video games. And then if they have something positive that you want to reward them for, they can get more time. But not to say, oh, I'm punishing you by taking away your time. Because kids love video games so much that can just make kids feel worse, and you'll see a spike in behavioral issues. When kids are online gaming and talking to their friends, and you just say, I'm taking this away, that can then cut them off from some of those friendships.
There have been case studies where, say, a person suffering from depression, or say anxiety, it's probably better, say a person suffering from anxiety, where they play video games as a way to kind of cope with that anxiety, and maybe even talk to friends online and so forth, but they're socially anxious, they don't want to go outside. And so the parents take away video games because they see them playing video games all the time and not going outside. But what those parents did is they just completely isolated that child from all their social networks. So now they're anxious inside with nobody to talk to. And so it becomes a very dangerous thing for a parent or anybody to kind of diagnose a child or another adult themselves and then just go take away that medium that they think is causing it. It'd be almost like the old adage, like depressed people tend to sleep a lot, or they tend to lay in bed a lot. It'd be like taking away a bed of a depressed person. Like, you wouldn't do that. It wouldn't make any sense. And this might be the same thing here, that if you take away that thing that looks like it's causing the problem, you actually might make the problem even bigger.
The violent video game debate can be sensitive and difficult to navigate, even as both sides of the issue grows closer to consensus each year. Our goal is to bring you as much information as possible so that you can make informed decisions for yourself and your family. But one thing is for sure: kids love video games, and the industry is only growing. In our schools and colleges, everywhere our kids play. It has created a space for our once thought nerdy, introverted kids and our latchkey kids and allowed them to shine. It makes them a part of a team and sometimes the hero in a world that belongs to them. Most importantly, possibly without even knowing, gaming gives them skills that will help them prepare for a brighter future.
And next tonight, how playing video games as a kid propelled him right into the fast lane of NASCAR and his first big win.
It's here the controller candidates are trained for either the control tower or an in-route center, handling air traffic at 18,000 feet or above. The students who seem to do the best are often video gamers.
What is it about gaming skills that could make you a good controller?
The ability to take in all of that information quickly, make a quick decision, and then if that decision's not the right one, being able to come up with a plan B or plan C.
For Olelo Community Television, I'm Sisto Domingo.